The phone rang at 2 in the morning, jolting me awake in my new apartment. I fumbled for the device, squinting at the unknown number flashing across the screen. A professional voice identified herself as Sandra from my bank's fraud department, and her words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Someone had accessed my savings account and withdrawn $12,000 using a forged signature on withdrawal forms. The bank representative mentioned the signatures didn't match my file, but someone claiming to be me had presented identification. My heart pounded as I realized only 3 people knew my social security number and banking details. My mind raced to my parents' house where I had left my important documents during my recent move. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. I threw on clothes and drove through the empty Denver streets toward my childhood home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The familiar 2-story colonial house with its peeling blue shutters looked innocuous in the pre-dawn darkness, but I knew answers waited inside. I used my old key and found my parents, Patricia and Robert, sitting at the kitchen table with steaming coffee mugs, acting as if nothing catastrophic had happened. My mother looked up from her newspaper with those calculating brown eyes I remembered from my childhood. Patricia had always been the family strategist, the retired school administrator who planned every detail of our lives with military precision. Her graying auburn hair was pulled back in the same tight bun she had worn for 30 years, and her thin lips formed a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Joseph, what brings you here so early?" she asked, using the formal name she preferred over the casual Joe everyone else called me. My father barely glanced up from his sports section. Robert had spent 40 years in construction, and his weathered hands still bore the permanent stains of concrete and paint. His salt and pepper beard needed trimming, and his flannel shirt hung loose over his expanding belly. He had always been the follower in their marriage, nodding along with whatever Patricia decided was best for the family. "Someone stole $12,000 from my bank account," I said, watching their faces carefully. "They used forged documents and somehow had my personal information." Patricia set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "That sounds terrible, honey. Identity theft is such a problem these days. You should probably call the police." "The bank already did that," I replied. "They're investigating how someone got access to my documents. Funny thing is, I left all my important paperwork here when I moved to the apartment last month." Robert finally looked up, his pale blue eyes darting between Patricia and me. "We would never touch your things without permission, son. You know that." But I could see the guilt written across his weathered features like graffiti on a wall. His left hand trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee. A nervous habit I had noticed since childhood whenever he was caught in a lie. "Where are my documents now?" I asked. Patricia stood and walked to the kitchen counter, her movements stiff and defensive. "They're still in your old bedroom, exactly where you left them. We haven't touched anything." I climbed the stairs to my childhood room, finding the cardboard box where I had stored my banking information, social security card, and other sensitive documents. Everything was there, but something felt wrong. The papers were organized differently than I remembered, and my bank statements were on top instead of buried beneath other documents where I had placed them. When I returned to the kitchen, I found my sister Amanda had arrived with her family. She stood in the doorway looking haggard and defeated, her blonde hair unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, and her clothes hung loosely on her thin frame. At 32, Amanda had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. Her husband Derek slouched against the refrigerator, avoiding eye contact with everyone. He had lost weight since I had seen him last, and his usual confident demeanor was replaced by nervous energy. His work boots were scuffed and dirty, but I knew he hadn't been to a job site in months. Their twin boys Mason and Tyler sat at the kitchen table eating cereal and swinging their legs. At 8 years old, they were unaware of the adult tension swirling around them, focused only on their breakfast and the cartoon show playing on Patricia's tablet. "Amanda, perfect timing," Patricia said, her voice taking on a different tone. "Joseph is here about some banking issues." What kind of issues? Amanda asked, genuine concern in her voice. I explained about the theft, watching my sister's reaction carefully. Her surprise seemed authentic, but Derek shifted uncomfortably against the refrigerator. That's awful, Joe, Amanda said. Do they know who did it? Patricia cleared her throat and exchanged a meaningful look with Robert. Actually, we need to discuss something with you, Joseph. Please sit down. I remained standing, crossing my arms over my chest. I think I'll stand for this conversation. We borrowed some money from your account. Patricia said, the words coming out in a rush. It wasn't stealing because we're family and we fully intend to pay you back. The kitchen fell silent except for the twins' cartoon show and the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I stared at my parents, waiting for the full explanation. Robert cleared his throat nervously. Amanda and Derek are facing foreclosure on their house. They need $30,000 by the end of the month or they'll lose everything. We already gave them $18,000 from our retirement savings, Patricia added. But it wasn't enough. You have plenty of money saved up and we knew you would want to help your sister if you understood the situation. I turned to Amanda, who was staring at the floor with tears in her eyes. How long have you been having financial problems? About 2 years, Derek answered for her. I lost my job at the automotive plant 8 months ago, but we kept hoping I'd find something steady. We maxed out the credit cards, trying to keep up with the mortgage payments. Why didn't you ask me directly? I demanded. Because we knew you'd lecture us about budgeting and responsibility, Amanda said, finally meeting my eyes. You've always been the responsible one, Joe. You don't understand what it's like to have real obligations. Patricia nodded in agreement. Amanda has 2 children to think about, Joseph. She can't just pick up and start over like you can. Family comes first, and your sister's family needs this money more than you do. You make a good salary at the financial firm, Robert added. You can rebuild your savings account. Amanda doesn't have that luxury. I felt my anger building like pressure in a steam kettle. So you decided to steal from me instead of having an honest conversation about Amanda's problems. We didn't steal anything. Patricia snapped, her administrator voice emerging. We took money from one family member to help another family member. That's what families do. Did you forge my signature on bank documents? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Patricia's jaw tightened and Robert looked down at his hands. We did what we had to do to save Amanda's house, Patricia said finally. Sometimes parents have to make difficult decisions for the good of the whole family. Derek pushed himself away from the refrigerator and walked toward the back door. I need some air, he muttered. Amanda followed him outside, leaving me alone with my parents and the twins, who were still absorbed in their cartoons. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You went through my personal documents, forged my signature on bank forms, and stole $12,000 from my savings account. And you think that's acceptable because Amanda needs money. We borrowed money, Patricia corrected. And yes, we think helping your sister keep her house is more important than your hurt feelings about our methods. Have you been planning this for a while? Patricia and Robert exchanged another look, and I saw the truth in their guilty expressions. We've been discussing Amanda's situation since you got your promotion 3 months ago, Patricia admitted. We knew you could afford to help, but we also knew you'd probably refuse or attach conditions to any assistance. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. While I had been excited about my raise and planning my move to a better apartment, my parents had been scheming to steal from me. They had pretended to support my new independence while secretly planning to undermine it. Good to know, I said quietly, the words carrying more weight than any shouting match could have conveyed. Patricia's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means I understand exactly where I stand in this family, I replied. Amanda's needs come first and my rights don't matter. Good to know. I walked toward the front door, my parents following behind me. Joseph, don't be dramatic, Patricia called out. We can work this out like adults. You're right, I said, turning back to face them. We can absolutely work this out like adults, starting with me calling the police to report the identity theft and bank fraud. Robert's face went pale. Now hold on, son. There's no need to involve the authorities in a family matter. You made it a legal matter when you committed crimes, I said. Family loyalty works both ways, and you chose to destroy it when you decided I was an acceptable victim. I left them standing in their doorway watching me drive away in the early morning light. As I headed back to my apartment, I realized my parents had taught me a valuable lesson about their true character. I just hadn't expected the education to cost me $12,000 and the last remnants of my trust in the people who had raised me. I spent the rest of the morning at First National Bank, where manager Susan Rodriguez walked me through the devastating evidence of my parents' systematic theft. Susan was a professional woman in her 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and she treated my situation with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm afraid this goes beyond the single transaction you reported," she said, spreading documents across her desk. "We've identified 6 different forged transactions over the past 14 months, totaling $28,000. My stomach dropped as I examined each fraudulent withdrawal. The earliest forgery was crude and obvious, with my father's blocky handwriting attempting to mimic my signature, but the later documents showed improvement, as if someone had been practicing. My mother's careful cursive appeared in the more recent forgeries, her teaching background evident in the precise letter formation. "How did they get away with this for so long?" I asked. Susan pulled up security footage on her computer monitor. "Your father visited the bank multiple times, each time growing more confident in his deception. He had your correct personal information, account numbers, and social security number. Our tellers had no reason to question his identity." The black and white footage showed Robert approaching the counter with increasing boldness over the months. In the earliest video, he appeared nervous and hesitant. By the most recent visit, he walked with the confidence of a regular customer, chatting casually with the teller while conducting his fraudulent business. "There's something else." Susan continued, pulling out a phone log. "We received 2 calls from someone claiming to be your girlfriend, confirming withdrawal authorizations. The caller said you were working overseas and had asked her to handle your banking needs temporarily." I recognized Patricia's manipulative touch in that detail. She had always been skilled at crafting believable stories to explain away inconsistencies. Susan showed me additional evidence that made my blood run cold. My parents had opened a joint savings account specifically to deposit the stolen money, then transferred it to Amanda's mortgage company in smaller amounts designed to avoid triggering fraud detection systems. "They were sophisticated about it," Susan explained. "Each transfer was below the $10,000 reporting threshold, and they spread the transactions across several weeks to make them appear routine. The bank had copies of fake documentation my parents created to make their theft appear legitimate. They had forged gift letters explaining the money as family assistance, and they had created false loan agreements showing planned repayment schedules that never existed." "What are my legal options?" I asked. "You'll need to file a police report for identity theft and bank fraud," Susan said. "We'll cooperate fully with any investigation. The evidence is clear that you were a victim of systematic financial crimes." I drove back to my parents' house with a folder full of evidence and a determination to confront them with the full scope of their betrayal. I found them in the kitchen again, this time with Amanda and Derek seated at the table, looking miserable. "We need to talk," I announced, spreading the bank documents across the kitchen table. Patricia glanced at the papers and immediately became defensive. "Joseph, there's no need to make this more complicated than it needs to be." $28,000, I said, pointing to the total on the bank statement. "You didn't take $12,000. You've been stealing from me for over a year." Robert's face flushed red. "Now see here, that's not how we look at it." "How do you look at it?" I demanded. "We look at it as family members helping each other," Patricia replied. "Derek lost his job and Amanda needed support. We knew you'd inherit everything we own someday, so we were just advancing your contribution to family needs." Amanda stared at the documents with growing horror. "Mom, you told me you were using your retirement savings to help us." "We did use our retirement money first," Patricia said defensively. $18,000 from our 401k, but it wasn't enough, and we knew Joseph could afford to contribute more. Derek pushed back from the table and stood up abruptly. "I can't listen to this anymore," he said. "We were desperate, Joe. We had 30 days before foreclosure and nobody else was willing to help us. So you decided to help yourselves to my money without asking," I said. "We were going to tell you eventually," Robert claimed. "After Amanda's situation stabilized and Derek found steady work." I pulled out another document from my folder. "What about this? You forged my signature on tax documents claiming me as a dependent to increase your refund." Patricia's face went white as she recognized the IRS forms. "That was just a small adjustment to help cover the money we spent on Amanda. You committed tax fraud using my identity," I said. "The IRS thinks I'm your dependent living in your house and relying on your financial support." Amanda buried her face in her hands. "I never knew about any of this. I thought Mom and Dad were just being generous with their own money. Your parents convinced you to accept stolen money," I said, not unkindly. "Whether you knew the source or not, you benefited from crimes committed in my name." Derek became agitated, pacing around the kitchen. "What do you want us to do, Joe? We can't give the money back because we already paid it to the mortgage company. And we can't qualify for a legitimate loan because my credit is destroyed. I want you to understand that this isn't a family disagreement anymore," I said. "This is a criminal matter involving identity theft, bank fraud, and tax fraud. The police are already investigating." Patricia's administrative mask finally slipped, revealing genuine fear beneath her composed exterior. "You called the police on your own parents." "I reported crimes that were committed against me," I clarified. "The fact that my own parents committed those crimes doesn't make them legal." Robert tried one more appeal to family loyalty. "Son, we raised you and provided for you your whole life. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counted for everything until you decided to steal from me," I replied. "Now it counts for nothing." I gathered up the bank documents and headed for the door, leaving my family to contemplate the consequences of their choices. As I walked to my car, I heard Amanda crying and Derek shouting at my parents about involving him in their criminal schemes without his knowledge. The sound of my family falling apart should have made me sad, but instead I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in my adult life, I could see my parents clearly without the fog of childhood loyalty obscuring my vision. They weren't misguided or desperate. They were criminals who had chosen to victimize their own son rather than face the consequences of their daughter's poor financial decisions. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. I finally understood that my role in this family had always been to sacrifice my own interests for Amanda's benefit. My parents had been conditioning me for this moment for years, teaching me that my needs were secondary to my sister's wants. But their biggest mistake was assuming I would accept their betrayal quietly, the way I had accepted their favoritism throughout my childhood. They had underestimated the man they had raised, and now they were about to learn that some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences. The next morning I sat in the law offices of Williams & Associates explaining my situation to attorney Marcus Williams. Marcus was a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who specialized in financial crimes and family disputes, and his reputation for aggressive representation had drawn me to his firm. "This is more complicated than typical identity theft," Marcus said after reviewing my bank documents. "Family members rarely pursue criminal charges against each other, but your parents have committed serious federal crimes." He opened a thick file and pulled out several official-looking documents. "I did some preliminary research after your call yesterday. Your situation is worse than you realize." My stomach clenched as Marcus spread new papers across his desk. "What did you find?" "Amanda's mortgage documents list you as a co-signer and backup income source," he said. "According to the loan paperwork, you're legally responsible for her mortgage payments if she defaults." I stared at the mortgage application bearing my forged signature. "I never signed anything for Amanda's house." "I know that, but the mortgage company doesn't," Marcus explained. "Your parents provided them with your employment verification, salary details, and contact information. They claimed to have legal authority to act as your financial advisors. He showed me additional documents that made my blood run cold. Patricia had called my workplace pretending to be my secretary, requesting employment verification for what she claimed was a family medical emergency loan. She had obtained my W-2 information and used it to inflate Amanda's loan application to qualify for a larger mortgage than Derek's income alone would support. My mother posed as my secretary. "She's quite convincing," Marcus said grimly. "She told your HR department that you were handling a family crisis and needed immediate verification of employment and salary for medical loan approval. They faxed her your employment information without question." Robert had contributed to the deception by creating fake utility bills and rental agreements to make Amanda's household appear more financially stable than reality. They had even forged references from fictional previous landlords to support Amanda's character and reliability. "The mortgage company has you listed as guarantor for the full loan amount," Marcus continued. "If Amanda defaults, they'll come after you for the remaining balance of $230,000. I felt dizzy as the implications sank in. How is that possible when I never signed anything? "Because your parents created an extensive paper trail showing your consent and participation," Marcus explained. "They forged a notarized document giving your permission to be a co-signer complete with a fake notary seal." He showed me the fraudulent notarization which bore the official seal of Patricia's former colleague at the school district. Patricia convinced her friend to notarize blank documents claiming they were for educational purposes related to teaching financial literacy to students. The friend Margaret Chen had unknowingly participated in mortgage fraud by lending her notary authority to Patricia's criminal scheme. Margaret's seal appeared on multiple documents related to Amanda's loan, making her an unwitting accomplice in federal crimes. "This gets worse," Marcus said, pulling out my credit report. "The mortgage appears as your obligation, not Amanda's. That's why your recent apartment application required additional documentation. Landlord saw a $200,000 mortgage obligation and questioned your debt-to-income ratio." I realized that I had been unknowingly responsible for Amanda's mortgage payments for 2 years, explaining why my credit applications had been more difficult recently. My financial profile showed obligations I never knew I had. "There's more," Marcus said, producing another file. "I found evidence of additional fraudulent activity using your identity. Your parents have been busy." He showed me applications for 3 credit cards in my name, all with substantial limits and all maxed out. The cards were delivered to my parents' house where Patricia intercepted the mail and activated them using my personal information. $25,000 in credit card debt, Marcus said. All charges were for Amanda's family expenses over the past 18 months. The credit card statements showed purchases at grocery stores, gas stations, and retail outlets near Amanda's house. Derek's truck repairs were paid with one of the fraudulent cards, and Amanda's car payment had been automatically charged to another. They also took out a personal loan for $15,000 in your name, Marcus added. The money went directly to Derek's bank account to cover his truck insurance and registration fees. I stared at the evidence of my parents' systematic destruction of my financial life. They hadn't just stolen money, they had created an entirely false financial identity for me without my knowledge or consent. "What about criminal liability?" I asked. Marcus's expression grew grave. "That's the most serious problem. The mortgage fraud makes you potentially liable for federal prosecution unless you can prove you were a victim of identity theft rather than a willing participant." He explained that mortgage fraud was a federal crime carrying severe penalties, including substantial prison time. The government would need to determine whether I was a victim or a conspirator in the fraudulent loan application. "The good news is that the evidence clearly shows you were victimized," Marcus said, "but you'll need to cooperate fully with federal investigators and press charges against your family members to establish your innocence." As I prepared to leave Marcus's office, he handed me a business card for Detective Raymond Hayes at the Financial Crimes Unit. "Call him today," Marcus advised. "The sooner you report this, the better your chances of avoiding prosecution." I sat in my car outside the law office staring at Detective Hayes's business card and contemplating the complete destruction of my family relationships. My parents hadn't just betrayed my trust, they had potentially destroyed my future by making me criminally liable for their fraud. The scope of their deception was breathtaking in its audacity and thoroughness. They had spent years building a false financial identity for me, using my good credit and steady income to subsidize Amanda's lifestyle, while leaving me vulnerable to criminal prosecution. I realized that my parents' favoritism toward Amanda had evolved into something much darker than simple preference. They were willing to sacrifice my freedom and financial security to maintain the illusion that their golden child deserved support, regardless of the cost to others. The time for family loyalty and forgiveness had passed. My parents had made their choice when they decided to commit federal crimes in my name. Now I had to make mine, and protecting myself from prosecution meant ensuring they faced the full consequences of their criminal behavior. Detective Raymond Hayes met with Marcus and me at the police station the following day. Detective Hayes was a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience in financial crimes, and his methodical approach to my case revealed disturbing new layers to my parents' criminal enterprise. "This isn't their first rodeo," Detective Hayes said, spreading surveillance photographs across the conference table. "Your parents have been running a sophisticated identity theft operation for at least 3 years." The photographs showed Patricia and Robert at various banks' loan offices and government buildings throughout the Denver metropolitan area. In each image, they appeared confident and practiced suggesting extensive experience with fraudulent transactions. "How many other victims are there?" I asked. Detective Hayes opened a thick case file. "We're still investigating, but so far we've identified potential fraud affecting 23 individuals. Your parents targeted elderly retirees, former school district employees, and other people whose personal information Patricia could access through her position as an administrator." He showed me copies of fraudulent loan applications bearing the forged signatures of Patricia's former colleagues. Retired teachers, maintenance workers, and cafeteria staff had all been victimized by the same sophisticated methods used against me. "Patricia used her administrative access to photocopy personnel files," Detective Hayes explained. "She had social security numbers, addresses, birth dates, and employment histories for hundreds of former employees. Robert's construction background provided the perfect cover for their operation. He used his business contacts to create fake employment verification and rental references for fraudulent loan applications. His network of contractors and suppliers unknowingly provided credibility for the false documentation. They were particularly clever about targeting the right victims," Detective Hayes continued. "They focused on elderly retirees who rarely checked their credit reports and people who had moved away from the Denver area after retirement." The detective showed me evidence of systematic mail theft from victims' homes. Patricia and Robert had redirected credit card statements and loan documents to post office boxes they controlled, preventing victims from discovering the fraud until substantial damage was done. "Your case is unique because you're their largest single target," Detective Hayes said. "Most of their other victims lost between $5,000 and $15,000. Your losses exceed $60,000 when we include all the fraudulent accounts and obligations." Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "What about criminal exposure for Joe?" "That's where this gets interesting," Detective Hayes replied. "The mortgage fraud makes Joe potentially liable for federal prosecution, but the scope of his parents' criminal enterprise actually works in his favor." The detective explained that the federal investigation would focus on Patricia and Robert as the masterminds of a multi-victim conspiracy rather than pursuing individual cases of mortgage fraud. My cooperation and victim status made me valuable as a witness rather than a target for prosecution. "We need Joe to testify about the methods his parents used and the timeline of their criminal activity," Detective Hayes said. "His inside knowledge of their family dynamics will help us understand how they identified and targeted victims." He showed me evidence that Amanda and Derek's lifestyle over the past 3 years had been entirely funded by fraudulent use of multiple victims' identities. Their family vacations, home improvements, and Derek's recreational vehicle purchases all traced back to accounts opened with stolen personal information. Amanda and Derek may not have known the full scope of the fraud, but they certainly knew their sudden financial windfall was suspicious, Detective Hayes said. Nobody's luck changes that dramatically without explanation. The investigation revealed that my parents had convinced local businesses to extend credit using victims' identities. Patricia told furniture stores and appliance dealers that she was helping elderly relatives make purchases, but handling the transactions for convenience. Robert arranged financing for home improvement projects, claiming to represent family members who were too busy or unable to shop personally. They exploited their reputation in the community, Detective Hayes explained. People trusted them because they'd been customers for decades. Nobody questioned why Patricia was suddenly handling financial transactions for so many different relatives. The detective showed me evidence of Patricia's most audacious fraud. She had created a fake power of attorney document, giving herself legal authority to make financial decisions for multiple victims. She used this forged document to justify her actions to banks and loan companies, claiming she had legitimate authority to access accounts and make transactions. The power of attorney gave her incredible freedom to commit fraud, Detective Hayes said. Financial institutions rarely question properly notarized legal documents, especially when the person presenting them appears respectable and knowledgeable about banking procedures. Marcus asked about the timeline for prosecution. How long before charges are filed? We're preparing arrest warrants now, Detective Hayes replied. Federal prosecutors want to move quickly before your parents destroy additional evidence or target more victims. He explained that Patricia and Robert would face multiple federal charges, including identity theft mail, fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Each count carried substantial prison time, and the number of victims would result in significant sentence enhancements. What about Amanda and Derek? I asked. They'll likely face charges related to their knowing participation in the mortgage fraud, Detective Hayes said. Amanda signed loan documents that she knew contained false information, and Derek helped hide assets from the mortgage company. The detective warned me that my family would probably attempt to pressure me into dropping the investigation. They'll claim this is destroying the family over money that can be repaid, he said. But federal crimes don't disappear, because families reconcile. As we concluded the meeting, Detective Hayes handed me his card with a direct phone number. Call me immediately if your family tries to intimidate you, or if they attempt to leave the area, he said. Interstate flight would make this a federal manhunt. I left the police station with a clear understanding of my parents' criminal sophistication and the federal government's commitment to prosecution. My family crisis had evolved into a major federal investigation affecting dozens of victims across multiple states. The revelation that I was just one of many victims actually provided some psychological relief. My parents' betrayal wasn't personal. It was part of a calculated criminal enterprise that treated everyone as acceptable targets for exploitation. But that knowledge also filled me with anger about the elderly victims who had trusted Patricia's position and reputation. Retired teachers living on fixed incomes had lost their savings to finance Amanda's comfortable lifestyle, and Derek's recreational purchases had been paid for with money stolen from people who couldn't afford the losses. My parents had used their community standing and professional reputations to prey on vulnerable people, and they had involved their own children in federal crimes without regard for the consequences. The scope of their betrayal extended far beyond family dysfunction into systematic victimization of innocent people. The federal investigation would ensure justice for all the victims, but it would also result in my parents spending significant time in federal prison. As I drove home, I reflected on how quickly my family had transformed from dysfunction to criminality, and how their choices had made prosecution inevitable regardless of my feelings about family loyalty. I agreed to cooperate fully with the federal investigation, but I wasn't prepared for how quickly events would spiral beyond anyone's control. Detective Hayes called me at 6 a.m, 3 days after our meeting, with news that changed everything. Your parents tried to flee, he said without preamble. We obtained warrants to freeze all accounts connected to the fraud, and Patricia panicked. She withdrew $18,000 in cash from various accounts yesterday afternoon. I sat up in bed, instantly awake. Where are they now? That's the problem, Detective Hayes said. Amanda and Derek loaded their belongings into a moving truck last night. Derek's brother Carl drove up from Phoenix with a rental truck, and they're planning to disappear before we can arrest them. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Patricia. I showed the screen to Detective Hayes, who nodded for me to answer while he listened on speaker. Joseph, you have to stop this madness, Patricia said, her voice shaking with emotion. Amanda is having a breakdown and the boys are terrified. You're destroying this family over money. Where is Amanda now? I asked. She's on her way to Arizona with Mason and Tyler. Patricia sobbed. Derek is following in his truck with their belongings. They can't go to prison, Joseph. Those children need their parents. Detective Hayes motioned for me to keep her talking while he contacted other officers. Why didn't you think about the children before you started stealing from people? I asked. We never meant for it to go this far, Patricia said. It started small, just helping Amanda with a few bills. But Derek kept losing jobs and the expenses kept growing, and we didn't know how to stop. She revealed that Amanda and Derek's escape plan included relocating to Arizona, where Derek's cousin owned a construction company that paid workers in cash to avoid employment verification. They planned to start over with new identities if necessary, using the remaining stolen money to establish themselves in a state where the federal investigation couldn't easily reach them. Robert's talking about mortgaging the house to pay back some of the money, Patricia continued. We can make this right if you just give us time. It's too late for that, I said. This isn't just about money anymore. You committed federal crimes against dozens of people. Patricia's tone turned desperate. Please, Joseph. Amanda called me crying from the road. She said she'd rather die than go to prison and lose her children. Don't let your anger destroy everything. Detective Hayes was already coordinating with federal agents and Arizona State Police to intercept Amanda and Derek before they could establish themselves in a different state. Interstate flight would transform this from a white-collar crime case into a federal manhunt with much more serious charges. Where exactly in Arizona are they going? I asked. Patricia hesitated, then gave me Carl's address in Phoenix. Derek thinks he can work construction under a false name until this blows over, she said. He doesn't understand that there's no running from federal charges. After ending the call, Detective Hayes explained the legal implications of Amanda and Derek's flight. Interstate transportation of stolen money flight to avoid prosecution and conspiracy to obstruct justice, he said. They've just escalated their charges significantly. Federal agents arrested Amanda and Derek at Carl's house in Phoenix within hours. The FBI recovered $14,000 in cash and additional evidence linking them to the broader conspiracy. Derek's claims of ignorance became impossible to maintain when agents found detailed records showing his participation in money laundering and asset concealment. Amanda's arrest was particularly difficult because Mason and Tyler witnessed federal agents taking their mother into custody. The children were placed in protective custody temporarily while social services determined appropriate placement with relatives. During her initial questioning, Amanda revealed the extent of my parents' psychological manipulation. They had convinced her that I was secretly wealthy and hiding substantial assets from the family. They showed her fake bank statements suggesting I had multiple accounts and was being selfish by not helping during Derek's unemployment. They made me believe you were the problem, Amanda told federal agents. They said you had enough money to help us but chose not to because you resented my happiness. Patricia had crafted an elaborate narrative portraying me as a cold, calculating person who hoarded wealth while watching his sister's family struggle with financial hardship. She had convinced Amanda that taking money from my accounts was justified because I could easily afford the losses. Mom showed me statements that made it look like you had over $100,000 in savings, Amanda said. She said you spent more on your apartment furniture than we needed to save our house. The fake bank statements Patricia created were sophisticated forgeries designed to fuel Amanda's resentment and justify accepting stolen money. Patricia had used her administrative skills to create believable documentation, supporting her false narrative about my financial situation. Derek's confession revealed that he had suspected something suspicious about his family's sudden change in fortune, but he chose not to investigate because the money solved their immediate problems. He admitted to helping transport stolen money across state lines and assisting in hiding assets from creditors and law enforcement. Meanwhile, Patricia called me again from Colorado, begging me to intervene with federal authorities to reduce Amanda's charges. She was willing to accept full responsibility for the fraud if prosecutors would treat Amanda as a victim rather than a co-conspirator. "She's just a young mother who made mistakes," Patricia pleaded. "Derek led her into this mess and we enabled it. Amanda doesn't deserve to go to prison." But federal prosecutors weren't interested in plea bargains that would allow major participants in the conspiracy to avoid accountability. Amanda had signed fraudulent loan documents, received and spent stolen money, and participated in the cover-up when the investigation began. Robert attempted to broker a family meeting to discuss resolution options, but Detective Hayes advised against any contact with my parents while the federal investigation continued. Any communication could be interpreted as witness intimidation or obstruction of justice. "Let the legal system handle this," Detective Hayes said. "Your parents made their choices and now they have to face the consequences without involving you in their damage control efforts." As I hung up after Patricia's desperate phone call, I realized that my decision to report the original theft had triggered a chain of events that would permanently destroy my family. Amanda and Derek's flight to Arizona had transformed them from sympathetic figures struggling with financial hardship into federal fugitives who abandoned their children to avoid prosecution. The children were now victims of their parents' criminal choices, and I felt guilty about my role in creating their current situation. But I also understood that allowing my parents' crimes to continue unchecked would have resulted in more victims and greater harm to innocent people. My parents had created an impossible situation where any outcome would cause pain and destruction. Their criminal enterprise had grown too large and sophisticated to resolve through family discussions or partial restitution. Federal law enforcement had taken control of the situation, and my family's fate would be determined by prosecutors and judges, rather than by forgiveness and reconciliation. The point of no return had been reached, and there was no path back to the family relationships that had existed before I discovered the truth about my parents' criminal activities. FBI Special Agent Nicole Foster took control of the investigation when Derek and Amanda crossed state lines, and her federal task force quickly uncovered the staggering scope of my parents' criminal enterprise. Agent Foster was a 15-year veteran of financial crimes investigation, and her team's expertise revealed layers of fraud that local police had missed. "Your parents weren't just opportunistic thieves," Agent Foster explained during our meeting at the federal building. "They were running a sophisticated identity theft network that victimized vulnerable people across 4 states. She showed me files documenting systematic exploitation that extended far beyond the original 23 victims Detective Hayes had identified. Patricia had used her position at the school district to access personnel records for hundreds of current and former employees, creating a database of potential targets for identity theft. Patricia maintained detailed spreadsheets tracking each victim's credit limits, account balances, and vulnerability factors," Agent Foster said. She rated potential targets based on age, health status, family situation, and likelihood of detecting fraud. The FBI had seized computers from my parents' house containing evidence of industrial-scale identity theft. Patricia had created fake email accounts impersonating dozens of elderly victims, using these accounts to redirect financial statements and loan documents away from victims' actual addresses. Robert's role was equally sophisticated. He had established relationships with corrupt employees at banks, credit agencies, and government offices who provided insider access to victim information in exchange for cash payments. His construction network included people willing to create false employment verification and rental references for fraudulent loan applications. They were operating like an organized crime syndicate. Agent Foster continued. They had systems, procedures, and networks that allowed them to commit fraud efficiently across multiple jurisdictions. The scope of victimization was breathtaking. Elderly retirees from Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Kansas had lost their savings to finance not just Amanda's lifestyle, but also Patricia and Robert's own comfort. They had used stolen money to pay for their house renovations, vacation trips, and Robert's new truck. Your case was actually unusual because you're their own son, Agent Foster said. Most identity theft operations avoid targeting family members to prevent emotional complications that might lead to discovery. She showed me evidence that Patricia had been stealing identities since she began working at the school district 15 years earlier. Her access to employee records had provided a steady stream of potential victims, and her administrative skills had allowed her to create sophisticated false documentation. We found evidence suggesting your parents stole over $400,000 from various victims over the years, Agent Foster said. They were careful to keep individual losses small enough to avoid triggering major investigations. The FBI's financial analysis revealed that Amanda and Derek's lifestyle had been subsidized by multiple victims for the entire duration of their marriage. Their house purchase, car loans, and even their wedding expenses had been paid with money stolen from elderly school district retirees who trusted Patricia's position and reputation. Amanda may claim ignorance, but the evidence suggests otherwise, Agent Foster said. Her mortgage application contained specific information that could only have come from stolen financial records. She showed me documents proving Amanda had provided detailed financial information about multiple family members to support her loan application, including income data for people she claimed as references but had never actually spoken to. Derek was more directly involved than he admits, Agent Foster continued. Bank records show he personally transported stolen money across state lines multiple times, making him a key participant in the conspiracy rather than a passive beneficiary. The investigation revealed that Derek had used stolen identities to obtain commercial licenses for construction work, allowing him to bid on projects using false credentials and stolen contractor insurance. His apparent unemployment was actually a cover for fraudulent business activities funded by identity theft. Amanda and Derek's flight to Arizona had been planned for months, rather than being a panic response to my police report. Agent Foster showed me evidence of advanced preparation, including false identity documents, cash reserves, and employment arrangements with Derek's cousin that were designed to help them establish new lives under assumed names. They weren't running from your charges, Agent Foster said. They were executing an escape plan they'd developed in case their larger criminal enterprise was discovered. Federal prosecutors explained that my testimony would be crucial for establishing the timeline and methods of the conspiracy. My inside knowledge of family dynamics would help juries understand how Patricia and Robert manipulated their victims and co-conspirators. You're our best witness for explaining how they gained access to victim information and convinced people to trust them with financial matters, the prosecutor said. Your perspective as both victim and family member gives you unique insight into their psychological methods. The federal grand jury indicted Patricia and Robert on 47 counts, including identity theft, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Each count carried substantial prison time, and the number of victims qualified them for enhanced sentences under federal sentencing guidelines. Amanda faced 8 federal charges related to mortgage fraud, money laundering, and interstate transportation of stolen money. Derek was charged with 12 counts, including fraud conspiracy and flight to avoid prosecution. Agent Foster explained that the investigation had prevented additional victimization of elderly people who were unaware their identities had been compromised. Your decision to report the original theft led us to discover and stop ongoing crimes against dozens of vulnerable victims. The federal asset forfeiture process would recover substantial money for victim compensation, but many elderly victims had suffered losses that exceeded their ability to recover financially. Some retirees had been forced to return to work or sell their homes because of money stolen by my parents. This case represents one of the largest family-based identity theft conspiracies we've prosecuted, Agent Foster said. The sophistication and duration of the criminal enterprise justify the maximum sentences allowed under federal law. As the federal investigation concluded, I realized that my parents' crimes extended far beyond family betrayal into systematic victimization of innocent people who had trusted them based on their community reputation and professional positions. The elderly teachers and school workers who had lost their retirement savings to finance Amanda's comfortable lifestyle would never fully recover from the financial and emotional damage caused by people they had considered trustworthy colleagues and friends. My decision to report the original theft had exposed a criminal enterprise that might have continued victimizing vulnerable people for years if left undetected. While the destruction of my family was painful, the prevention of additional victimization provided some justification for the harsh consequences my relatives would face. Federal justice moved efficiently once the scope of the conspiracy became clear, and my parents would soon learn that their crimes carried penalties far more severe than they had anticipated when they decided to steal from their own son. 6 months after the arrests, I sat in federal court watching Patricia receive 4 years in federal prison for her leadership role in the identity theft conspiracy. The judge's words were measured but stern as she described the systematic victimization of vulnerable elderly people who had trusted Patricia's position at the school district. You exploited your professional reputation to prey on retirees who considered you a trustworthy colleague, Judge Martinez said. Your crimes weren't motivated by desperation, but by greed and a complete disregard for the welfare of innocent people. Patricia stood silently as the sentence was pronounced, her composure finally cracking under the weight of federal consequences. The woman who had commanded respect as a school administrator was now a convicted felon facing years in prison for financial crimes that had destroyed dozens of lives. Robert received 3 years for his role as accomplice and money launderer. His construction contacts had provided crucial infrastructure for the conspiracy, and his willingness to personally transport stolen money across state lines had enabled the enterprise's geographic expansion. Amanda's sentencing was more complex because of her children's situation. She pleaded guilty to mortgage fraud and conspiracy, receiving 2 years of supervised probation with community service requirements. Her cooperation with federal investigators and status as a manipulation victim influenced the judge's decision to avoid prison time that would further traumatize Mason and Tyler. Derek received 18 months in federal prison for interstate transportation of stolen money and conspiracy. His claims of ignorance were undermined by evidence showing active participation in money laundering and asset concealment over multiple years. The financial recovery exceeded my expectations and provided meaningful compensation for most victims. The federal asset forfeiture process recovered Patricia and Robert's house vehicles and personal property, generating over $200,000 for victim restitution. My portion of the recovery totaled $68,000, covering not just my direct losses but also compensation for the credit damage and legal expenses caused by my parents' crimes. The mortgage company removed my liability for Amanda's loan after FBI evidence confirmed my signatures had been forged throughout the application process. Agent Foster presented me with a certificate of appreciation for my cooperation in exposing the broader conspiracy. Your willingness to pursue justice despite family pressure led to recovering over $400,000 for vulnerable victims who might never have discovered the theft, she said. The recognition ceremony included several elderly victims who thanked me personally for enabling the investigation that recovered their retirement savings. Margaret Thompson, a 78-year-old retired teacher, explained that Patricia's theft had forced her to choose between medication and groceries until the restitution money restored her financial security. I trusted Patricia because we worked together for 20 years, Margaret said. She knew my health problems and financial situation, but she stole from me anyway. Your courage in reporting your own parents gave me back my independence. I used part of my recovered money to establish a non-profit organization, helping identity theft victims navigate the complex process of financial recovery. Working with Marcus Williams, we created a legal assistance program for people who couldn't afford attorneys to fight financial institutions and credit agencies. The Identity Theft Recovery Foundation grew quickly as word spread about our services. We helped victims understand their rights, challenged fraudulent accounts, and provided emotional support for people struggling with the psychological trauma of financial victimization. 6 months after sentencing, I received detailed letters from my incarcerated family members. Amanda wrote from her halfway house where she was completing community service requirements at a food bank that served homeless veterans. "I understand now how my choices hurt innocent people," Amanda wrote. "Mom and Dad convinced me that taking money from you was justified because you could afford it. But they never told me about the elderly victims who couldn't afford to lose their savings. I'm working 2 jobs to pay restitution and support my children who are thriving with Derek's sister. They're getting counseling to help them understand why their parents made such terrible decisions." Derek's letter from federal prison was shorter, but showed genuine remorse for his participation in the conspiracy. "I knew our sudden change in fortune was suspicious, but I chose not to ask questions because it solved our problems," he wrote. "I'm completing my GED and learning electrical work so I can support my family legally when I'm released. The kids visit monthly and they're doing well in school." Patricia's prison letters demonstrated significant psychological change through mandatory therapy sessions. "I'm learning about the cognitive distortions that allowed me to justify criminal behavior as family protection," she wrote. "I convinced myself that helping Amanda was more important than the rights of my victims. But therapy has shown me how selfishness and entitlement drove my decisions rather than maternal love." She was teaching literacy classes to fellow inmates and had committed to volunteering with elder abuse prevention programs after her release. "I want to spend my remaining years helping protect people like my victims, rather than exploiting them," she wrote. Robert's transformation was slower, but eventually included genuine acknowledgement of his crimes. "I followed Patricia's lead for so long that I forgot how to think independently about right and wrong," he wrote. "Prison has given me time to understand that my actions were inexcusable regardless of my motivations. I'm working in the wood shop and sending my earnings to the Victim Compensation Fund. I maintained limited contact with my family members, focusing on their progress rather than relitigating past grievances. Amanda and I developed a civil relationship centered on my nephew's welfare, with clear boundaries about financial matters and family dynamics. My relationship with Patricia and Robert required more time and caution. I agreed to correspond with them during their incarceration and consider rebuilding contact after their release, but only if they demonstrated sustained change through actions rather than words. The experience taught me valuable lessons about family loyalty, personal boundaries, and the importance of accountability. I learned that genuine love requires protecting people from the consequences of their destructive behavior rather than enabling them to continue harming others. My new apartment became a sanctuary where I hosted monthly support group meetings for identity theft victims. The nonprofit work gave meaning to my painful experience, transforming personal trauma into community service that helped dozens of people rebuild their financial lives. Unexpectedly, the forced independence strengthened my relationships outside the family. My friendships deepened when I stopped prioritizing family obligations over personal connections, and I met Sarah, a fellow victim advocate, through my nonprofit work. Sarah understood the complexity of loving family members while refusing to enable their destructive choices. Her support helped me navigate the emotional challenges of rebuilding my life, while my parents served federal prison sentences for crimes committed against me. The federal investigation introduced me to the larger community of people working to protect vulnerable populations from financial exploitation. My testimony contributed to legislative efforts to strengthen identity theft protections and improve coordination between financial institutions and law enforcement. As I reflected on the transformation of my life over the past 2 years, I realized that my parents' betrayal had ultimately freed me from unhealthy family dynamics that were limiting my personal growth. Their crimes forced me to develop independence and self-advocacy skills that served me well in all areas of life. The painful process of pursuing justice had eliminated family relationships based on manipulation and exploitation, creating space for connections built on mutual respect and genuine care. My nephews benefited from seeing healthy adult relationships rather than the dysfunctional patterns that had characterized our family for generations. True family protection meant preventing harm rather than covering it up, and sometimes the most loving action was refusing to enable someone's destructive behavior even when that refusal caused temporary pain. Justice wasn't about revenge, but about stopping harmful patterns and creating accountability that allowed everyone involved to heal and grow. My parents had taught me an unintended lesson about the importance of boundaries, consequences, and personal integrity. Their criminal choices had destroyed the family they claimed to be protecting, but their consequences had also created opportunities for genuine healing and positive change. The federal investigation was complete. Restitution had been paid to victims, and my family members were serving their sentences while working toward redemption. I had rebuilt my financial security, established meaningful work, helping other victims, and created healthy relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. The journey from betrayal to recovery had been longer and more complex than I ever imagined, but it had ultimately led to a life characterized by purpose, integrity, and genuine connection with people who shared my values rather than exploiting my loyalty. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right, even when that choice meant watching relationships you cherished fall apart? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself when the people closest to you were the ones causing harm? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with your own experiences, hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding justice. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding that sometimes protecting yourself means holding the people you love accountable for their actions, no matter how painful that process might be. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you deserve relationships built on trust and respect, not manipulation and exploitation. Stay strong and remember that choosing justice over comfort is always the right path, even when it leads through temporary darkness toward lasting light.